And when it comes to UFOs, I think there's this kind of misnomer that this all started in the 40s. It started with the advent of our nuclear program. Diana, you've done some amazing work about how this might comport with things that we've observed in our religious tradition and in history in the past.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, first, I want to explain a little bit about what we do in my field, which is called religious studies. Religious studies is a discipline that is academic, so we don't advocate for religion. We're not ministers or theologians. We're academics. We use archaeology, history, academic disciplines in order to look at social effects of basically religion. Most of the people in the world are religious. Usually 83 to 85% of the world affiliate with some religion. So it's actually important to study religion. I'm not going to advocate for belief in UFOs. I'm going to tell you my story about how I got into this, because I never thought about UFOs. In fact, until 3 years ago, I had not seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And what a great movie that is, by the way. So I'm not going to advocate for belief in UFOs, but what I am going to do is tell you about my entrance into this field, which has ramped up considerably since I started in 2012. So in 2012, I was writing a book called Heaven Can Wait about what in my field we call ascent narratives. All cultures have their own forms of this genre of oral tradition or literature. And what an ascent narrative is basically a person who is either touring the afterlife, like Dante touring hell, purgatory, and then heaven. A pre-Christian ascent narrative would be the allegory of the cave in Plato's Republic, where a person thinks that reality are these shadows on the wall and ascends out of the cave and recognizes that, wow, there's another reality. So this is what I was doing. I was looking at ascent narratives in the Catholic history and Christian history. And I utilized archives. So I've been to the Vatican and looked at their various archives. They have many, over 53 miles of shelving of old documents. These are the kinds of things you see in archives, material culture, codexes, things like this. Philadelphia has a wonderful archive. So I looked at archives and I was looking for data about purgatory, which I found. But I also found reports of aerial phenomena by Catholic people from Europe and Canada and the United States from 1200 to 1800. And I thought these were interesting because a lot of times when European Catholics saw something in the sky, they would have a moment of confusion. What is this? What are the things they would see in the sky? So they would see discs, light, orbs. Sometimes they would see things they thought were flying houses. Okay, the flying house of Laredo. So these, they would see these aerial phenomena, and I took notes because I'm a researcher and that's what I do. I don't leave data out. So I had this long list of these sightings. Sometimes they would interpret them as souls from purgatory that needed to be prayed away, but they saw these things. And I thought that was interesting, but UFOs never crossed my mind. So I kept a log of these sightings. So I showed a friend of mine and said, "What do you think of these reports?" And immediately he looked at them and said, "They remind me of a Steven Spielberg movie. They look like UFOs." And I thought he was silly. Okay, I thought he was silly. I didn't think about it again until I started to publish my information about these events and reports, what now I call angel contact events, generally is how I refer to them. I started to get inquiries from people at aerospace companies, and not just one. I got a lot. And I was thinking that this was strange because this has never happened to me before when I was writing about Catholic history. But it was this specific thing, which was the angel reports, and they wanted my data, and they were very interested in certain things. They wanted to know, what did the people describe seeing? Did the people describe light? What was the color of the light? What did the objects look like? And most interesting to me, did the people report injuries? Okay, did the people report injuries? Well, yes, actually, they did. But so they wanted my data. I happened to meet one of these people. This was quite an impressive person. I call him pseudonymously in the book that I wrote about this, Tyler. And he had amazing credentials. He worked for our space program. He was the government liaison to Elon Musk for certain missions. And he said that they had acquired debris from UFO crash sites and that he was reverse engineering these and they were creating this technology, kind of game changing technology. That was in 2016 that I went with people that I had to have as pseudonyms. Okay. So now Gary Nolan has come out, and that's actually a relief to me that he's come out as himself. And the reason why we went was because Tyler, who's still a pseudonym, for a person who is a mission controller and works in the Space Force. So whereas I was looking at these as maybe metaphoric or historical, not necessarily, well, not at all real. That's not what we do in my field. We're not looking at these as real things. All of these very intelligent, credentialed, highly placed people, scientists, were looking at these as if they were real. And so that was shocking to me. Okay. I then looked back at my tradition, at the Catholic tradition, and I looked at some of the most iconic angel contact events, and I began to understand them in a different way. And one that you might know about is the stigmata. So the stigmata happened to Saint Francis of Assisi, arguably the most famous saint of the Catholic Church. Even though you may not be Catholic, you've seen statues of him. If you've, gone into gardens, you'll see him. He has, usually a bird on his shoulder or something like that. So a very charismatic person living in the 1200s in Europe. And he had an experience of, thankfully they have one of these here, of this seraphim. So if you'll see over here, and the icon of this event is a seraphim, which I thought was really, it actually convinced me to come. I was like, yeah, I'll come and I'll talk about what I've studied and, what I know about. So the seraphim is this angel, and it doesn't look like the angels that we typically know about. And, well, if you look at the primary source material of these contact events, it looks like that. And it generally has an eye in the middle of it, and it does it injure. I looked at the primary source material for St. Francis of Assisi, and what I found was that when he had this contact with this thing that he described as a seraphim, it came down, there was light, it had an eye, and there are competing primary source reports, but the best report shows that Brother Leo, who's about 15, he's watching and he sees that this is how he describes it, that this thing dealt harshly with Francis. Afterwards, Francis was injured, and the tradition determines that these injuries are called the wounds of Christ. But what happened was that this was a very hush situation for Francis and Leo. And when they went back to the convent, he tried as best as he could to make Francis comfortable because he was injured. And they didn't tell anybody. Okay, so it was completely quiet. It was a stigma. Okay, it was literally a stigma. And so he eventually died, most likely from these wounds.